Ever get that feeling where everyone around you is talking strategy, throwing around terms like synergy and disruption, and you're just thinking, can someone just give me the straight goods on what actually works?
Oh, absolutely. Like there's the secret code or something.
Exactly, like a shortcut everyone else has found to understanding this complex stuff.
It's a super common feeling, especially in business, and it perfectly sets the stage for the book we're diving into today.
Right, because we're tackling Richard Rumelt's good strategy, bad strategy, which honestly feels like the antidote to all that buzzword soup. It gets so much praise.
It really does. Robert Eckert from Mattel called it a must-have. Brian Farrell at THQ liked that it wasn't, fast food strategy.
Huh, I like that. No quick fixes here. And that other bit of praise we saw really nailed it, didn't it? Saying Rumelt points out that, well, a lot of companies, their strategies aren't really strategies at all.
Mm-hmm. He cuts through that deluge of naive advice, as it says. The stuff that just leaves you confused.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to be your guides through Rumelt's thinking. We'll unpack the key concepts, the frameworks, those real aha moments from the book.
Basically, try to make it really accessible, like a thorough walkthrough.
Yeah, think of it as your um, comprehensive but clear overview. I want you to walk away really understanding what good strategy is, why bad strategy is everywhere, and how to tell the difference. Maybe even start crafting some good strategy yourself.
Sounds like a plan. So where does Rumelt start? How does he first show us what good strategy looks like in action?
He jumps right in with a killer historical example. Shows the sheer impact strategy can have against, like, impossible odds. It's the Battle of Trafalgar, 1805.
Ah, Nelson. Right.
Exactly. So you've got Napoleon's huge Franco-Spanish fleet, 33 ships, ready to invade England against them.
Yeah.
Just 27 British ships, way outnumbered.
And naval battles back then were pretty standard, weren't they? Just line up and blast away.
Totally. A slow, grinding slugfest. But Admiral Nelson, he had this radical idea. He split his fleet into two columns and sailed them straight into the enemy line, like perpendicular to it.
Whoa. That sounds incredibly risky for the lead ships.
Insanely risky. But Nelson figured the less experienced enemy gunners couldn't handle the rough seas that day, couldn't aim well, and he was right.
So what happened?
Complete decisive victory. The British lost 0 ships. None. The Franco-Spanish, they lost 22. That's like 2/3 of their fleet.
Wow. Wow. That's not just winning, that's dominance. Secured the seas for Britain for ages after that.
For over a century. It just hammers home how a smart strategy, a real insight, can lead to completely disproportionate outcomes. It's not just about having more stuff.
It's about understanding the situation, finding that vulnerability, and doing something unexpected, which leads him from that massive historical battle to something, well, a bit more mundane.
Right. He brings it down to earth. He talks about being at a Web 2.0 conference. This was back in 2006.
Okay, peep hype time.
Totally. And everyone's talking about these new internet companies. He mentions he teaches strategy. And the CEO asks him, basically, what does strategy even mean now?
And the CEO's own answer.
Was. Well, let's just say it wasn't very strategic. He basically said strategy was just finding a hot area and, like, being there. Web 2.0. Yeah, we're doing that. That was it.
Yikes. No thought about how to compete. Or what their advantage was.
Nope. Just presence. Which really highlights why we need Rumelt's much deeper definition.
So what is Rumelt's core definition then? It's not just being there.
Definitely not. He says strategy is a cohesive response to an important challenge. It's a whole package. A coherent set of analyses, concepts, policies, arguments, and actions.
Okay, coherent set in actions seem key there.
Hugely key. That actions part is something Rumelt really drills down on. He hates this idea that strategy is just, high-level thinking separate from actually doing things.
Right, that gap between the plan and the execution, the chasm he talks about.
Exactly. He mentions this exec complaining about their fancy strategy process that never actually led to anything getting done. So the big takeaway here is real strategy has to include the how. It needs that path to action.
It needs that punch, as he calls it. Otherwise, it's just
Wishful thinking.
pretty much wishful thinking in a fancy PowerPoint deck.
Okay, so we've seen good strategy in action with Nelson and the frustrating vagueness of, well, being there. Chapter 2 dives right into the sources of bad strategy. Rumelt spots 3 main recurring problems, right?
Yeah, 3 big ones. He calls them hallmarks of bad strategy. First, the failure to face the problem. Second, mistaking goals for strategy. And third, something he just calls fluff.
Okay, let's get that first one. Failure to face the problem. That sounds fundamental.
It really is. Rumelt argues a lot of bad strategy just comes from not wanting to confront the actual difficult challenges. He uses this great example, this guy Chad Logan in his 2020 plan.
Oh, yeah, the graphics company guy. 20% revenue growth, 20% profit margin. Sounds ambitious.
Exactly. Ambitious, yes. But Logan called it his overall strategy. And Rumelt's point is, where's the plan? How are you going to hit those numbers? What obstacles are you going to overcome? It wasn't there.
It was just a target, a wish.
Precisely. An aspiration, not a strategy. Now contrast that with, say, Steve Jobs coming back to Apple when they were in serious trouble.
Right. Apple was struggling big time.
And Jobs didn't just say, okay, goal, be profitable again. No. He made incredibly tough calls. He shrank the company, cut way back, focused only on core survival stuff. It was a direct, brutal response to the actual dire situation.
So a good strategy starts with honesty, facing the ugly truth, maybe.
Facing the actual problem, however uncomfortable. And Rumelt gives another great example, this time from the military.
The Gulf War. Schwarzkopf's left hook.
You got it. The initial plan was a direct assault into Kuwait, huge potential casualties. Schwarzkopf looked at that, faced the awful prospect, and basically said, nope, gotta be a smarter way.
And the left hook was that huge flanking maneuver.
Right.
Sweeping way out west.
Exactly. Totally unexpected. While everyone watched the forces south of Kuwait, this massive coalition force came in from the side. The result: minimal coalition losses, swift defeat of the Iraqi forces.
A brilliant strategic move.
It was. But what's fascinating, as Rumelt points out, is that the idea of that kind of maneuver envelopment, it wasn't top secret. It was literally described in the U.S. Army's own field manual, FM 100-5.
No way. So it was hiding in plain sight.
Kind of. The genius wasn't inventing something totally new. It was recognizing the specific Iraqi vulnerability and applying that known principle effectively and surprisingly. Which connects to another idea he uses, David and Goliath.
Ah, the classic underdog story.
Right. We assume Goliath's bigger, stronger, better armor. He's got all the advantages, but David doesn't play Goliath's game. He uses his own strengths, the sling, agility, and targets Goliath's weakness, his unprotected head.
It flips the script on what strength even means. Good strategy finds those non-obvious weaknesses.
Exactly. Okay, so that's failure to face the problem. The second big source of bad strategy, mistaking goals for strategy.
We saw that with Chad Logan's 2020 plan. The goal was the strategy.
Precisely. Rumelt digs into this with the classic Wal-Mart example. He talks about a class discussion where students list all the reasons for Wal-Mart's early success.
Right, like stores in small towns, low prices, good logistics, non-union. The whole list.
Sounds pretty comprehensive, yeah. A good list of successful policies.
Seems like it.
But then Rumelt asks the key question. If it was all so obvious and easy to copy, why didn't Kmart just do it? Why did Wal-Mart dominate them for so long?
Good question. So what was the real strategic insight?
It wasn't just the individual policies, it was the network. The interconnected system of stores and that incredibly efficient integrated logistics system linking them all together. That was the hard-to-copy advantage.
So Kmart saw Walmart as just another retailer with slightly different tactics.
Yeah, they missed the revolutionary system Walmart was building. They saw the trees, missed the forest of the network strategy.
That makes sense. And this missing the bigger picture isn't just in business, right? He mentions the Soviet Union, too.
He does. On the surface, the USSR in the late 80s looked powerful, huge military.
But underneath.
Overextension, massive pressure on multiple fronts, U.S. missile tech getting better, the technology gap widening, Reagan's Star Wars initiative, falling oil prices hitting their income, the endless war in Afghanistan.
Wow, a lot piling up.
It was this whole web of interconnected pressures, this kind of indirect competition that weakened them strategically despite their apparent strengths. It wasn't one single thing.
And he even applies this goals, not strategy idea to national security.
Yeah, the 2006 U.S. National Security Strategy focused on huge goals like fighting terrorism, stopping nukes, absolutely critical goals.
Right.
The strategy documents often lacked the specific, coherent policies and programs needed to actually achieve those goals. It was more a statement of intent than a concrete plan.
Which leads us right into the third hallmark, fluff.
Ah, yes, fluff. This is where the language gets really fancy, lots of jargon, buzzwords.
But it doesn't actually mean anything.
Pretty much. It obscures the fact that there's no real strategy underneath. The classic example is Enron's attempt to get into bandwidth trading.
Oh boy, Enron.
Okay. They put out this presentation all about their strategy for this new market. But the core of it was just vague diagrams and phrases like strategies of the market enablers, things like having an electronic trading platform.
Which is just what you need to be in the market, right? Not how you win.
Exactly. It described basic activities, not a competitive advantage. How would they actually succeed, especially since trading bandwidth was totally different from gas or electricity? No standard price, no easy way to balance supply.
And we all know how that ended for Enron.
14 months later, boom, collapse. The fluff couldn't hide the lack of a real, viable strategy.
And it's not just spectacular flameouts like Enron. He mentions Harvester back in the 70s, too.
Right, their big corporate strategic plan. It was basically just a binder collecting all the separate plans from each division and the overall strategy. Increase market share and cut costs in every division.
So just a list of goals again, really. No overarching corporate logic.
None, just divisional wish lists smushed together. And Harvester, once a giant, ended up having to sell off huge chunks of itself.
And back to Chad Logan one last time. His 2020 plan.
Pure performance goal, not strategy, lacked the how. So those three, not facing the problem, mistaking goals for strategy, and using fluff, those are Rumelt's big red flags for bad strategy.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We can see what bad strategy looks like. But the next big question is, why is there so darn much of it? Chapter 3 tackles this, right? Why is bad strategy so common?
Yeah, he digs into the why, and it comes down to some pretty basic human and organizational stuff. First off, just avoiding the hard work.
Crafting good strategy is difficult.
It's intellectual demanding, yeah.
Yeah.
And bad strategy can be, well, easier, especially avoiding the pain of choice.
The pain of choice. What does he mean?
Real strategy forces you to choose, to focus here, which means saying no over there. That can upset people, create conflict. It's often just easier to set vague goals everyone can nod along to, even if they don't lead anywhere specific.
Ah, the path of least resistance.
How do I-
Keep everyone happy, even if the strategy is weak.
Exactly. And then he brings in this fascinating idea from political science, democratic voting and the Condorcet paradox.
Okay, Condorcet paradox. Sounds complicated.
Yeah.
Layman's terms.
Think about picking a restaurant with friends. You like Italian over Mexican, someone else likes Mexican over Thai, a third person likes Thai over Italian.
Yeah.
If you vote pairwise, Italian beats Mexican, Mexican beats Thai, but Thai beats Italian. There's no stable winner. Preferences just cycle around.
Huh. So how does that apply to company strategy?
Rumelt says it shows how hard it can be for groups to reach a stable consensus on a clear strategic direction. You end up with these watered-down compromises trying to please different factions, but the result is often a strategy with no real focus or power, like designing by committee.
You end up with beige. Strategically beige.
Huh, exactly. Strategically beige. Then there's template-style strategy. This one probably feels familiar to a lot of listeners.
The fill-in-the-blanks approach. Vision, mission, values, goals, strategies.
Yep, that whole ritual. And look, those elements can be useful, but Rumelt argues they too often become a substitute for the real hard work of analysis and thinking. It feels like you've done strategy because you filled in the boxes.
Like Dow Chemical strategies he mentions, which were really just aspirations.
Right. The template gives you a comforting sense of structure, but doesn't guarantee any actual strategic insight or advantage. It avoids that tough thinking and choice-making.
And the last reason he gives for bad strategy is kind of surprising. New thought.
Yeah, this early 20th century idea focused on the power of positive thinking. Basically, visualize success, deny failure, and you can manifest your goals.
Okay, positive attitude is generally good. But how does that lead to bad strategy?
Rumelt warns it can become a substitute for realistic assessment and planning. If you just believe strongly enough, you don't need to worry about obstacles or competitors. He quotes from books like The Science of Getting Rich, which really push this idea.
So it's wishful thinking disguised as philosophy.
Kind of. And he contrasts this with someone like Jack Welch at GE. Welch talked about ambitious goals, sure, but his actions were about hard strategic choices, like ditching underperforming businesses. It wasn't just positive vibes.
Got it. So avoiding hard choices, group decision problems, template thinking, and wishful positivity. Those are key drivers of bad strategy.
According to Rumelt, yes. They make it easier to produce something that looks like strategy but lacks the necessary substance.
Okay, so after dissecting bad strategy, Chapter 4 is where Rumelt introduces the core of his positive framework, the kernel of a good strategy. This sounds crucial. What's in the kernel?
It's the absolute heart of his approach. The kernel has three essential interconnected parts: a diagnosis, a guiding policy, and coherent actions.
Diagnosis, guiding policy, coherent actions. Okay, let's break those down, starting with the diagnosis.
The diagnosis is all about figuring out what's really going on, understanding the nature of the challenge you face. Rumelt quotes someone, John, saying, "A great deal of strategy work is trying to figure out what is going on."
So it's not jumping to answers, it's deeply understanding the problem first.
Exactly. A good diagnosis names the situation, it connects the dots between facts, and crucially, it points towards where you need to focus your effort. It can completely change how you see the problem.
He uses a big historical example here too, right? The Cold War.
Yeah, the U.S. policy of containment, George Kenna's famous long telegram in 46, wasn't just saying the Soviets are rivals, it was a deep dive into their ideology, their power structure, their inherent drive to expand.
And that diagnosis shaped U.S. policy for decades.
Absolutely. And things could have gone very differently if the diagnosis had been different. Like if they'd framed it as just a diplomatic issue or something for the UN to handle, the diagnosis sets the direction.
And business. Major strategy shifts often start with a new diagnosis.
Often, yes. Think about Lou Gerstner going into IBM in the early 90s. IBM's whole model was built on selling complete integrated systems.
Right, the mainframe era.
But microprocessors were changing everything, breaking the industry apart. The common diagnosis was, IBM's too big, break it up.
But Gerstner saw it differently.
He did. His diagnosis was that big customers still needed integrated solutions, even if the pieces came from different places. That different diagnosis led to a completely different guiding policy for IBM.
Okay, which brings us to the second part of the kernel. The guiding policy. What's that about?
The guiding policy is your overall approach, your method for tackling the challenge identified in the diagnosis. It's the high-level how, not just a vague goal, but a specific approach.
Like the Wells Fargo example he uses, their policy of cross-selling.
Exactly. Their vision might have been generic, but the guiding policy was concrete. Aggressively sell more products to each existing customer. The thinking was this would create network effects, give them better data, boost profits. It was an actionable approach to competition.
So the guiding policy gives direction. And Rumelt says it can be an advantage in itself.
Yeah, a good one can help you anticipate competitors, reduce internal confusion, focus resources, and make sure all your different activities pull in the same direction. He uses this relatable example of his friend Stephanie's corner grocery store.
Oh yeah, she faces tons of decisions, pricing, what products to stock, hours.
Right. Without a clear guiding policy, she's just reacting constantly. But if her policy is, say, focus on high-quality local products and great service for the immediate neighborhood, that gives her a filter for all those daily choices.
Makes sense. It provides consistency.
Exactly. And he contrasts this with a company that wanted a pan-European product line but couldn't make it happen. Why? No compelling guiding policy to overcome all the local priorities and force coordinated action.
The different countries just kept doing their own thing.
Pretty much. Until the pressure to actually do something forced them to decide what was most important for Europe as a whole. He also mentions Ford trying to put Volvo and Jaguar on the same platform.
Ooh, that sounds like a clash.
Big time. The guiding policy was just economies of scale, but that clashed horribly with the distinct brand identities of Volvo and Jaguar. Incoherent actions stemming from a flawed policy.
Okay, so diagnosis sets the stage. Guiding policy provides the approach, which leads to the third element.
Coherent actions. These are the specific things you actually do to implement the guiding policy. The concrete steps, the resource allocations, the initiatives.
They have to line up with the diagnosis and the policy.
Absolutely. They need to be consistent. Rumelt uses Toyota investing heavily in hybrid tech back when SUVs were king.
Right, everyone wanted giant gas guzzlers then.
But Toyota made big, coherent investments, R&D, buying tech, developing hybrid systems. Why? Their diagnosis was that fuel economy pressures would eventually rise. Their guiding policy was to lead in environmental tech. The hybrid investment was the coherent action that followed.
It was anticipatory, based on their strategy.
Exactly. So that's the kernel. Diagnosis, guiding policy, coherent actions, the fundamental structure of good strategy.
Got it. A clear problem definition, a smart approach, and actions that actually fit. Seems logical.
It is logical and powerful. And in the next chapters, Rumelt explores ways to make that kernel even more potent, starting with leverage.
Right. Chapter 5, the power of leverage. This is about amplifying your impact, yeah. He starts with a warning from scenario planner Pierre Wack about those typical high, medium, low forecasts.
Yeah, Wack called it the sucker bet. The danger isn't just that the future falls within the range.
What's the danger then?
It's getting lured into big investments based on that rosy high scenario, which might just be temporary. Then the market shifts, and you're stuck with useless assets, like Bush's experience with offshore drilling investments that tanked when oil prices fell.
Ouch. So you need deeper insight than just a range, which leads to pivot points.
Exactly. Pivot points are those spots in a system where applying focused energy gives you disproportionately large results. The example he uses is 7-Eleven Japan.
What was their pivot point?
Their insight was that Japanese consumers were super sensitive to local tastes and loved novelty, so their pivot point became relentlessly, efficiently refreshing their product mix to match hyper-local preferences, even down to having tons of different soft drink brands.
Constant change, tailored locally.
Right, that focus drove frequent visits and loyalty, a huge advantage.
So find what really matters to customers and focus there. Then he talks about pivotal objectives. Similar idea.
Similar, yeah. It's about focusing resources on one achievable goal that can have a wider impact, like Harry Williams transforming art study with a limited budget. He didn't spread the money thin.
No, he picked a pivotal objective, changing how art was studied, and focused his investment where it could make the biggest, most visible difference.
Smart. And then proximate objectives. Kennedy's moonshot goal is the classic example here, isn't it?
Absolutely. Land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Incredibly clear, inspiring, and crucially seen as feasible. It wasn't just, let's explore space. It was a specific, timed objective.
And feasibility was key. People believed it could be done.
Engineers knew the basic rocket science. Von Braun even wrote a memo saying, yeah, the Soviets are ahead on big rockets now, but moon landing is achievable with existing and developing tech.
And having that clear, feasible goal helps cut through ambiguity, like the uncertainty about the moon's surface.
Exactly. The proximate objective of the Surveyor mission's land robots, send pictures, gave them the specific data needed to design the Apollo landers. It focused the effort. Rumelt mentions doing an exercise with business school deans. Pick one feasible objective that would make the biggest difference. Better job placement, a PR win, get specific. Move beyond vague ambitions to something concrete. Okay, and the last leverage concept in this chapter is chain link systems. The helicopter analogy helps here.
Oh yeah, the helicopter flying analogy is great. You can't do the fancy stuff, night flying, bad weather, until you've absolutely mastered the basics. Controlling pitch, cyclic pedals, it has to become second nature.
Higher skills depend on mastering the lower ones.
Precisely. And it's the same for organizations. Some can tackle complex problems because they've already built the underlying coordination, processes, skills. And he uses the chain analogy too. The whole system is only as strong as its weakest link.
Like the Challenger O-ring disaster. One weak link, catastrophic failure.
Devastating example. Or in developing countries, improving ports doesn't help much if the roads are terrible or corruption is rampant. You have to fix the weakest links.
And the Marco Tinelli Machinery Company turnaround illustrates fixing a chain link problem.
Perfectly. Tinelli saw the interconnected problems. Machine quality was poor, the sales force was ineffective, costs were too high.
He didn't try to fix everything at once.
No, that was key. He went sequentially. First, fix machine quality. Then, train the sales force to sell the better machines. Only then, tackle cost reduction. The order mattered hugely.
Addressing the bottlenecks in the right sequence. Makes sense. And IKEA is another chain link example.
Yeah, their whole system, flat pack design, self-assembly, store layout, sourcing, it's all tightly linked and reinforces itself. Competitors can't just copy one piece. The strength is in the coordinated system.
Which leads to the idea of designing coordinated action. Hannibal at Cannae.
A military masterpiece of coordination. Infantry, cavalry, light troops, all moving in perfect sync, executing this incredibly complex plan with feigned retreats, envelopment, rear attacks.
Against a bigger Roman army.
And utterly destroyed them. It wasn't just individual skill, it was the brilliant design and execution of the coordinated effort.
And he compares this to designing a complex product, like a car.
Right. You're juggling driving pleasure, cost, brand, reliability, resale value, all these interacting factors. You're looking for the best overall configuration, making trade-offs. Like systems engineering at JPL on the Voyager mission, optimizing one instrument affected others. It requires that holistic design thinking.
Unless You have an overwhelming strategic resource, like Xerox patents initially.
Exactly. If you have a knockout advantage like Xerox did with plain paper copying early on, strategy can seem simpler, just execute. But that success can breed complacency, opening the door for competitors with better design strategies like Canon challenging Xerox or Walmart beating Kmart.
Got it. So leverage is about finding those key points, pivot points, objectives, weak links, and designing coordinated action, unless you have a truly dominant resource.
That's a great summary. Leverage amplifies the power of your core strategy.
Okay, moving on. Chapter 10 brings us back to a core concept, focus. And the Crown Core Conceal case study is central here, right?
Yeah.
What was the common wisdom about Crown's focus?
Yeah, the standard line was that Crown just specialized in hard-to-hold cans, aerosols, fizzy drinks, and sure, they did a lot of that.
But Rumelt says that's not the full story, or even the most important part.
Right, it's too superficial. He digs into their actual operations. Smaller plants, multiple customers per plant, deliberately keeping extra production lines idle.
Seems inefficient on the surface, keeping lines idle.
It does. And then this analyst in the class discussion, David, crunches the numbers and finds something surprising. Crown's production per customer was lower than competitors, but their price per can was way higher.
Lower volume, higher price. How does that work?
Rumelt connects the dots. He points to speed and that seemingly inefficient, less production per customer as clues. What was Crown really focused on?
Okay, I'm guessing it wasn't just hard-to-hold products then.
Exactly. Their true focus was competing on speed and service for customers with unpredictable needs, rush orders, fluctuating demand. Those customers were willing to pay a premium for that responsiveness.
Ah. So the smaller plants, the excess capacity, it all served that need for speed and flexibility.
Precisely. The entire operational system was designed around that specific competitive focus, not just the type of can.
And he contrasts this focus strategy with what happened later under CEO Avery.
Yeah, Avery shifted the focus to growth through acquisitions, especially getting big and piety plastic bottles, just chasing size and scale.
Did they lose the original focus?
Completely. They got bigger, but they lost that unique advantage in speed and service and didn't build a clear new one in piety. The CFO at the time even misunderstood focus, thinking it just meant, limiting the product line. He missed the deeper point about coordinated action around a specific advantage.
Growth for growth's sake, losing sight of strategy. Rumelt mentions lots of bad reasons leaders chase growth, right?
Oh, yeah. Bogus arguments about cutting admin costs, creating executive jobs, CEO pay tied to size, the excitement of M&A deals, advisor fees. He uses that Telecom Italia merger example, proposing a merger for economies of mass when a simple contract would do the job.
So not all growth is good growth. What's healthy growth then?
Healthy growth is the result of being good at something. Demand grows because your products, skills, or innovations are superior. You gain market share and profits because you're genuinely better, more efficient, more creative. It's an outcome, not just a goal in itself.
Okay, focus is key. Then chapter 12 is about using advantage. Where does advantage come from in the first place, according to Rumelt?
Fundamentally, it comes from asymmetries among rivals, differences. There are always tons of differences between companies, but strategic leadership is about spotting the critical ones and figuring out how to leverage them into a real, sustainable edge.
And the gorilla wrestling analogy is a warning here.
Yes, Susan's analogy. Just because you're a world-class sprinter, good at one thing, doesn't mean you should try wrestling a gorilla, a totally different arena where your sprinting skills are useless.
Don't wander into businesses where your strengths don't apply.
Exactly. She was warning a tech company not to jump into textiles just because it looked like an opportunity. Their tech skills wouldn't help them there.
He also mentions the U.S. strategy in Afghanistan as an example where maybe the advantage wasn't leveraged well, trying to win hearts and minds.
Yeah, he suggests that strategy didn't play to inherent U.S. strengths in that complex, decentralized environment. It was hard to target the enemy effectively using that approach. But then he gives a counterexample, Stuart and Linda Resnick.
The serial entrepreneurs, alarm systems, Teleflora, Roll International, nuts, water. They seem to succeed everywhere.
It's rare. Their skill seems to be creating an advantage itself across different industries, like in the nut business.
How do they build advantage there?
First, they stimulated demand for nuts as healthy snacks, a temporary edge. But then they built on it. Massive investments in planting trees, branding, wonderful pistachios, processing plants, distribution. That created huge-scale economies and barriers for smaller players.
Building layers of advantage. Okay, what about the puzzle of the silver machine? That sounds intriguing.
It's a bit abstract. Imagine a machine that's just inherently better at producing commodity silver. It has a competitive advantage, lower cost. But Rumel says it's not an interesting advantage strategically because the owner can't really do anything to make it more valuable or differentiate the silver. It's like owning a bond. It has value, but you can't enhance it through strategy.
Ah, so strategy is about advantages you can actively shape and grow. He also talks about stretching brands, like Disney.
Yeah, the challenge of taking a strong brand like Disney and extending it everywhere without diluting what makes it special. And the oil fields example, the rule of capture, shows how even a resource advantage, oil underground, disappears fast if competitors can easily access it too. You need isolating
That's
mechanisms.
ways to protect your advantage, like being a moving target.
Exactly. Continuous improvement, innovation like Microsoft constantly updating Windows makes it harder for rivals to catch up and copy you. He also makes a point about historical perspective.
Right, saying the changes from like 1875 to 1925 were actually bigger societal shifts than maybe 1942 to 1992. Puts current hype in perspective.
It does. And he notes the shift in tech from economies of scale, like IBM's hardware manufacturing, to economies of scale, like Cisco software expertise, being the key advantage.
So advantage is about leveraging differences, protecting them, and adapting to shifts like the move towards skills.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, chapter 13 shifts to using dynamics, understanding industry change. This feels crucial, but also really hard.
It is hard. But Rumelt says even a small edge in seeing where things are headed can be a huge advantage. He gives 5 guideposts to help anticipate and react to these waves of change. What's the first one?
Rising fixed costs,
Yeah.
especially in product development.
Right. When it gets much more expensive to develop new stuff like the shift to color film,
Yeah.
it forces industry consolidation. Only the big guys can afford the R&D, squeezing out smaller players.
Makes sense. Second guidepost, deregulation.
Or re-regulation. When the rules of the game change dramatically, old ways of doing business become obsolete fast. Think U.S. airline deregulation.
Southwest thrived, but older airlines like Continental struggled initially.
Yeah, Continental tried sticking to their old cost-plus pricing from the regulated era. Didn't work in a competitive market. New entrants exploit the openings, while incumbents clinging to old habits, inertia by proxy, Rumelt calls it, become vulnerable.
Okay. Third guidepost, predictable peaks in demand. This sounds counterintuitive. Faster adoption means quicker saturation.
Yep. For durable goods especially, everyone rushes to buy the new thing, market booms then. Saturation hits sooner than people expect. Managers often resist forecasts predicting a peak. They prefer the battle of the titans narrative.
Don't get caught up in the bubble, like the dot-com fiber optic overbuilding.
Classic example. Or relying too much on today's dominant portal strategies when the internet itself is still changing rapidly.
Fourth guidepost, incumbent response. What's a typical reaction from established players?
Generally resistance, especially if the change threatens their core skills, market position, the way they've always done things. Inertia is powerful. He digs into this more in the next chapter.
And the fifth guidepost, attractor states. What's an attractor state?
It's like the theoretical endpoint, how the industry should work most efficiently, given the technology and customer needs. It's where the industry is likely heading. He uses newspapers as an example.
Moving away from big general dailies towards more specialized players because of the internet and targeted ads like Google.
Exactly. The attractor state is likely more specialized, focused providers because technology enables that efficiency. Understanding the attractor state helps you see the direction of change.
Okay, those 5 guideposts, rising costs, deregulation, demand peaks, incumbent inertia, attractor states, help navigate industry dynamics. Chapter 14 then dives deeper into that inertia problem and also entropy. Inertia is like the supertanker analogy.
Yeah, big organizations resist changing course, even when everyone knows they need to. Change takes time, effort, overcoming internal resistance. But then there's entropy, too.
Entropy, like things just naturally falling apart.
Sort of. It's the tendency for organizations, especially if weakly managed, to become less organized, less focused over time. Things get messy. It requires constant leadership effort just to maintain focus and coherence. Rumelt jokes it's good business for consultants, cleaning up the entropic debris.
Ah, so inertia is resistance to change. Entropy is a drift towards disorder. He uses Continental Airlines again for inertia.
Yep. Post-deregulation, still using that old cost-plus pricing model struck in the past despite the new reality. And for entropy, he uses Dent and Sink, the garden supply chain.
What was happening there?
Analysis showed lots of their stores were actually losing money on an operating basis. Over time, they'd lost focus, efficiency had slipped, resources weren't allocated well. Classic entropy.
And Sloan's strategy at GM was an attempt to fight entropy.
Exactly. Imposing that structured a car for every person purpose policy on all the GM divisions was about creating order, preventing the brands from just blurring into an overlapping mess. But even that system needed constant upkeep to fight the natural tendency towards blurring.
Interesting. Then he talked about unexpected forces overcoming inertia, like 3D graphics and PCs.
Right. Driven by gamers, especially online games like Quake, suddenly there was this huge demand for powerful graphics chips that the mainstream PC industry hadn't really anticipated.
NVIDIA saw this shift.
They did. They pivoted strategically from general multimedia stuff to focusing heavily on 3D graphics, embraced the tech needed, the triangle method, and rode that wave, aligning with Moore's law. They overcame the industry's inertia.
So inertia and entropy are constant battles for organizations. Good strategy requires fighting both.
It really does. Requires constant vigilance and effort.
Chapter 15 talks about the science of strategy. He argues strategy isn't just planning, it's more like a hypothesis.
Exactly. It's an educated judgment and insight about what you think will work based on your diagnosis. It's not a mathematical proof spit out by a machine, which he says some executives seem to expect that crank-winding idea.
They want certainty, but strategy is inherently uncertain.
Right. He compares it to the scientific method. You have a hypothesis, your strategic insight, and its value is determined by testing it against reality, by empirical data, not just by who came up with it or how confident they sound.
Like Galileo challenging established beliefs with observational evidence.
Perfect analogy. New evidence, new hypotheses, challenging the old ways of thinking. He also uses the dark matter example from astronomy. Unexpected data forced scientists to hypothesize something new to explain why galaxies rotate the way they do. Strategy requires that openness to testing and revision based on results.
So strategy is a testable hypothesis. Then chapter 16, using your head, is about how to think more strategically as an individual. He starts with that anecdote about the Harvard student interviewing the CEO, Fred Fletcher.
Yeah, and Fletcher says the interview was the most valuable conversation he'd had all year. Why? Rumelt suggests maybe just having someone listen and ask fundamental questions about purpose, challenges, strengths, forced Fletcher to step back and reflect on his real priorities, his list.
Just the act of articulating it helped clarify things. And the TiVo exercise, asking managers for their single top recommendation.
That was designed to surface the different underlying assumptions and diagnoses within the team. Everyone sees the same company, but their top priority reveals how they uniquely understand the core problem.
It brings hidden disagreements or different viewpoints out into the open. He does address the blink idea, though, about trusting gut feelings.
He does. He acknowledges that rapid intuition, pattern recognition works well in some situations, especially with deep expertise.
But not for complex strategy.
He cautions against relying only on intuition for big, complex strategic calls because we all have predictable biases. Some decisions just require slow, deliberate, analytical thought. War strategy, major mergers experienced execs know you can't just wing those.
And we tend towards early closures, right? Locking onto an idea too soon.
Yeah, and we find it hard to question our own judgments. So he highlights 3 key skills for better strategic thinking. Using tools to fight that myopia, deliberately questioning your own judgment, and making a habit of recording your strategic judgments to learn from them over time.
Like the problem solution framing with TiVo. Initially, the problem seemed to be time-shifting TV.
Right, but a deeper diagnosis reframed the problem. The real issue was the content providers controlling the set-top box, which fundamentally limited TiVo's profit potential. Reframing the problem changes everything. He even imagines how sharp Steve Jobs would have been about TiVo's lack of control over key variables.
Jobs likely would have seen that lack of control as the core strategic weakness.
Probably. That critical, questioning viewpoint is key.
Okay, finally, chapter 17, keeping your head. This tackles the dangers of groupthink and flawed assumptions, right? Starting with the old transatlantic telephone cable.
Yeah, that represented a stable, regulated era. A consortium controlled things, predictable.
Until private fiber optic cables like Global Crossing came along.
Exactly. Suddenly, massive increases in capacity, driven by that fat pipe concept, the idea that abundant fiber creates huge economies of scale.
But then that Lehman Brothers report dismissed the obvious oversupply.
Yeah, they projected astronomical future demand to justify it, a classic inside view, ignoring the current reality of supply and competition. Rumelt calls this getting stuck in a closed circle.
Where analysis just reinforces existing beliefs based on, like, stock prices, detached from fundamentals, anchored by the belief the market is always right.
Precisely. Within that circle, the question of overcapacity became almost impossible to answer objectively. It was undecidable within their flawed frame.
And the 2008 financial crisis is the ultimate example of this. The inside view, social herding.
Monumental example. All those widely held beliefs that turned out wrong. Past crises don't matter now. The Fed has everything under control. U.S. markets are uniquely resilient. New financial tools have eliminated risk.
All those beliefs blocked people from seeing a classic, easy credit housing bubble.
They did. And he notes that government policies promoting home ownership had also contributed to that easy credit environment for years.
And even as it started to unravel, leaders kept defending the system with inside view arguments.
Yep, clinging to the narrative. Alan Greenspan's faith in financial innovation, for instance. The key lesson, Rumelt concludes, is you have to push back against that social herding, that inside view. Pay attention to real-world data, learn from history, look outside your own bubble.
Wow. Okay, that's a powerful warning to end on. So bringing this whole deep dive together, what's the absolute core takeaway from good strategy, bad strategy?
I think it's that good strategy is not magic. It's hard work. It's a thoughtful, coherent response to a clearly diagnosed problem. It's about honestly facing challenges, leveraging your real advantages, understanding the dynamics, and taking coordinated action. It's not just wishful thinking or a list of goals.
And that kernel diagnosis, guiding policy, coherent actions is the tool to get there. It's a framework for analyzing strategy and for creating better strategy yourself.
Absolutely. It cuts through the noise and gives you a practical way to think strategically.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Take a challenge you're facing right now, a real one, and try applying that kernel. What's the real diagnosis? What guiding policy could tackle it? What coherent actions would follow?
It's a simple framework, but using it rigorously can be incredibly revealing. And as Rumelt shows throughout the book, it's the foundation for actually making progress on important challenges.
Definitely. And if this discussion sparked your interest, the book itself goes even deeper, with tons more examples and nuance. Highly recommended.